योगेन चित्तस्य पदेन वाचां मलं शरीरस्य च वैद्यकेन योपाकरोत्थं प्रवरं मुनीनां पतञ्जलिं प्राञ्जलिरानतोऽस्मि आबाहुपुरुषाकारं शङ्खचक्रासिधारणं सहस्रशिरसं श्वेतं प्रणमामि पतञ्जलिम् गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णुर् गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरः गुरुः साक्षात् परब्रह्म तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः हरिः ओम. So in the previous session we looked at Sutra 3.11 sarvarthateikāgratāyoh kṣayodayau cittasya samadhi-pariṇāmaḥ. So essentially we had looked at a specific parinama which was given the term samadhi-pariṇāmaḥ, wherein the chitta enters into the samadhi, wherein there is a single alambanam or a single support for the chitta. So it changes from sarvarthata, where chitta is cognizing several things, to ekagrata, where it has a single support. So we have seen that in detail, and that particular parinama was given the name samadhi-pariṇāmaḥ. Today, in continuation of that topic, and therefore it is good to have reference to the previous sutras where we looked at nirodha parinama, then samadhi parinama, and so on. We begin with Sutra 3.12. Now Sutra 3.12 is tataḥ punaḥ śāntoditau tulyapratyayau cittasyaikāgratāpariṇāmaḥ. Now a third kind of parinama and is being coined. Parinama means change or transformation, and the third one is a term is being coined and defined, and that term is ekagratāpariṇāmaḥ. So what is it? The sutra says tataḥ punaḥ. Tataḥ means in continuation with the previous sutra. So first samadhi parinama happened, where from sarvarthata the chitta is gone into a state of ekagrata. From here, okay, so tata says from there, punaḥ, and from there further, śāntoditau tulyapratyayau. So śāntascha uditascha śāntoditau. Tulyapratyayau. Tulya. So the pratyaya here refers to the cognitive imprint on the chitta. In some sense, pratyaya is jnanam, the knowledge imprint, the cognitive imprint on the chitta, its support, its alambanam, whatever is being cognized. Now, śāntoditau tulyapratyayau means the pratyaya which becomes shanta, and the new pratyaya that arises, which is uditaḥ. So both of these are tulya, which are ekasaman. So they are both same, identical, equivalent. So when that happens for the chitta, it is known as ekagratāpariṇāmaḥ. So in the state of samadhi, after the samadhi parinamaḥ, the samadhi, sabija samadhi is the state. Now in that sabija samadhi, there is a cognitive imprint. There is a certain support or alambanam. Now one may ask, in this state, change should still be happening, because the very basic constituents of prakriti, the sattva, rajatama, the gunas, they are said to be constantly changing. So what is the nature of this change here? So that is, the shanta and udita happens, but the pratyaya, the state or the alambanam or the cognitive imprint, remains the same, because the one that manifests is identical to the one that was previously there. And this particular nature of change is known as ekagratāpariṇāmaḥ. So that is the meaning of the sutra, tataḥ punaḥ śāntoditau tulyapratyayau cittasya ekagratāpariṇāmaḥ. So this is the answer to the question. So once the sabija samadhi has been attained, what is the nature of parinama or change taking place? So that specific question is answered here. and that type of change is referred to as ekagratāpariṇāmaḥ. Now Vyasa has a short commentary on this particular sutra, so let us look at that. He says, samāhita cittasya purva pratyayah śāntah uttarah tatsadrishah uditah. So firstly, Vyasa says samāhita cittasya, where he makes it clear that from the very term tataḥ punaḥ, here the context is a chitta that is already in sabhija samadhi state. Now in that, a chitta of that nature, samāhita chitta means chitta that is in samadhi. Purva pratyayah śāntah uttaras tatsadrishah uditah. So the cognitive imprint, the previous one goes away and new one emerges. However, the new one that emerges is same as the previous one. So the one that became Shanta and the one that became Udita are the same. So samāhita chittam ubhayor anugatam punas tathaiva asamadhi breshad iti. So the samadhi chittam in this state is ubhayor anugatam. So as the one pratyaya became Shanta, the next pratyaya emerges, arises. Both are said to be identical or same. The chitta is underlying that change. So if you remember the previous two sessions, there is this notion of dharma dharmi that is being clarified over and over. So again here it is being clarified. Even though there is a certain change happening, the chitta underlies and it undergoes, it is constant through this change. It is present through vidyamanam. So it is present through this change. So ubhayor anugatam punas tathaiva asamadhi breshaditi. So until that samadhi goes away, until the yogi comes out of the samadhi to the worldly state, again and again the same thing happens. Same thing as in the ekagratāpariṇāmā, whereby the previous cognitive imprint and the next cognitive imprint remain the same. So even though there is a change, there is a ekagratāpariṇāmā, the cognitive imprint is constant. Sa khalu ayam dharmiṇah cittasya ekagratāpariṇāmaḥ. So it says, okay, so this very thing happening here is the ekagratāpariṇāmā of the chitta who is the dharmi, or the chitta which is the dharmi. So here it is being clarified that the ekagratāpariṇāmā goes back, even though it is of the alambanam, even though it is of the state of the chitta, etc. The parinama is attributed right down to the dharmi who is the chitta, who underlies all of this and who is present through these changes. So sakhalu ayam dharminaha, of the dharmi, the chitta, dharminaha cittasya, chitta who is the dharmi, of that chitta, this is known as ekagratāpariṇāmaḥ. So firstly we had seen nirodha-pariṇāmaḥ, wherein in an asampragnāta state or entering the asampragnāta state where there is absolutely no cognitive imprint at all, the chitta went from a vitthana to a completely nirbija state. So that was the nirodha-pariṇāmaḥ. Then we saw the samadhi-pariṇāmaḥ, where it went from a worldly sarvarthata state where various things are being cognized to an ekagrata state where there is a single support, single cognitive imprint. Further now we go into ekagratāpariṇāmaḥ. So that these are not necessarily, these are not in chronological sequence, but these are different types of parinama described in a certain sequence, which will be clarified in the next sutra, where one is the dharmalakṣaṇāvasthā and so on. So here what is happening is the state of the chitta is constant, but then how come you can say a parinama is happening? That is being clarified. In the sabhija samadhi state, when there is an alambanam, there is still a parinama happening, but however it is of this nature that the new cognitive imprint happens to be the same as the previous cognitive imprint, and that is the tulyapratyayau, and that is ekagratāpariṇāmaḥ. This will keep on happening while the yogi is in that state of sabhija samadhi, and until that samadhi is quote unquote broken and he comes back to the worldly state. This is the parinama that is going to happen, and this parinama is happening to the chitta who is the dharmi through all of this. So this is Sutra 3.3. Now, there's another text that slightly clarifies this. It says, Shāntaḥ atitam adhvānam pravishtaḥ Aparastu uditaha vartamane advani sphuritaha. So, what is the further clarification? When the term Shanta, what does it mean? Shanta means Atitam Advanam Pravishtaha. Means it goes in the path, or it goes in the way of the past. So it sort of becomes past tense. And what is Udita? What is the one that emerges? Aparaha Uditaha Vartamane Advani Sphuritaha. It enters into the way of the present tense, or the path of the present tense. So that is the terminology that is used here, where it is a Triyadva. It is as though there are three paths, one of the future, one of the present, one of the past. And an entity which is initially, it lies in the, so to speak, the way of the Anagata, something that has not yet come. So in what we know refer to as future. Then it changes to become the path of the present, and then it enters the path of the past. So, Shantaha Atitam Advanam Pravishtaha Aparasto Uditaha Vartamane Advani Spuritaha Śāntoditau Atitotpadyamano tulyapratyayau ekāgratāpariṇāmaḥ. So both of these, the Shanta and Udita, which are Atitaha and Utpadyamanaha, the one that has become the past and one that is becoming the present. Both of them, tulyapratyayau, ekāgratāpariṇāmaḥ. In this case of ekagratāpariṇāmaḥ, both of these are of the same form. So that is Sutra 3.12 with its bhashya and some elaboration. And with this we have seen Nirodha Parinama, Samadhi Parinama, and Ekagrata Parinamaha. All of these three are happening to the Chitta, who is the Dharmi.
So the third Parinama is being described in the 12th Sutra, tataḥ punaḥ. That means it is in continuation of the previous Sutra, where sarvartata is gone and ekagrata has come, digrative potential is gone, or digrative condition is gone, and one-pointedness has arrived. Now, what is that one-pointedness becomes clear here, or one objectness becomes clear here. Being a cognitive trance, whatever is the vritti in the mind, that is going to depart, and new vritti is going to come up, in the sense the chitta is constantly moving. The chitta doesn't stop. It is not a static matter. Even in samadhi, chitta is not a static matter, because it is definitely, essentially not a static matter. It is always a flow, like a river. Prashant Iyengar was mentioned. So it is a flow of tranquility. So it's a flow of vritti. So whatever is the content of the mind, that is going to become Shanta. And the Udita means upcoming vritti. The both vrittis are ditto identical. The Shanta vritti and Udita vritti. The departing cognition and arriving cognition in the mind. Tulyapratyayau. So they are identical. Contents are identical. Experience is identical. That is ekagratāpariṇāmaḥ. So Vyasa makes it clear that samahita cittasya, that means the chitta which is in samadhi. The samadhi is already there. Samahita cittasya pūrvapratyaya śāntaḥ. So the present state, the content is going to go to latency, and there will be upcoming vritti. Now that is uttara vritti. So pūrvapratyaya śāntaḥ and uttara tat sadrusha itaḥ. So the upcoming vritti is ditto identical to the vritti which is departing. And that is the characteristic condition of a samahita chitta, which is totally different than our state of mind. Whatever is the present content of the mind will be replaced by a new content of the mind, which are dissimilar, perhaps heterogeneous, perhaps opposite. And that's how we experience our state of mind, fluttering and state of mind. uncontrollable, and unpredictable. But here, the flow is Prashanta Vahita, as said earlier already. And therefore, there is Samahita Chitta. The Chitta in Samahitavastha. And therefore, the departing cognition in the mind and arriving cognition in the mind is going to be identical. And this is going to be identical until the Samadhi is revoked or Samadhi fades out. Samadhi preshat. So until the Samadhi goes away, this is going to continue. That departing content of the mind and its content and arriving the mind and its content is going to be identical. So that ensures the Samadhi. That helps the Samadhi structure to be maintained and raised up gradually. So this is going to continue. Śāntavritti, uditavritti, tulyapratyayau is going to continue until Samadhi gets revoked by any reason. And therefore it is the cittasyaikāgratāpariṇāmā. That means the finale of cognitive trance. That is what the cognitive trance is. Full-bloomed, full-fledged, fully blossomed Samprajñāt Samadhi or cognitive trance. And it is characterized by this Sutra, śāntavritti, uditavritti, tulyapratyayau. So these predicates are important to take note of. And that is called ekagratāpariṇāmā. So Patanjali has mentioned three parinamas that you just now heard: Nirodha Parinama, then Samadhi Parinama, and Ekagratāpariṇāmā. So these are the parinamas in the minds of a yogi. And bang opposite are parinamas in our minds, which is not in Samadhi, which is never in Samadhi. We have opposite kind of parinamas. So you can deduce our chitta parinama from the given chitta parinama. This is yogi's chitta parinama, and then we can deduce and extrapolate our chitta parinama, which is just opposite of what is mentioned in the three parinamas here. So that is also worth taking note of.
So now, having looked at Nirodha, Samadhi and Ekagratāpariṇāmās, let us move on to the new Sutra 3.13, which says, etena bhūtendriyeṣu dharmalakṣaṇāvasthāpariṇāmā vyākhyātāḥ. So etena means, from this discussion on the parinamas that has been done in the last few sutras, by this, bhūtendriyeṣu, in the sphere of the bhutas, which is all the physical entities essentially made up of Prithvi, Aap, Tej, Vayu, Akasha, etc. So all the physical things made up of earth, water, fire, air, so on. So bhuteshu and indriyeshu, on the indriyas. The indriyas, as we have seen, are the underlying shaktis or the underlying capacity for us to both. There is a jnanendriya to sense, karmendriya to act, manas as a ubhayendriya. So in the sphere of both of these, in the bhutas and the indriyas, dharmalakṣaṇāvasthāpariṇāmāḥ vyākhyātāḥ. So parinamas, changes, transformation. Of what type? Dharma, lakshana and avastha. So dharma parinama, lakshana parinama and avastha parinama, all of these vyākhyātāḥ have been defined, described. So that is what this sutra says. So with reference to these, or through the example and reference to these, which was done in the context of the chitta by describing Nirodha, Samadhi and Ekagratāpariṇāmā, that understanding can be extended to the entire sphere of the bhutas and the indriyas. By understanding the parinamas in terms of dharma parinama, lakshana parinama and avastha parinama. That is what this sutra says. Now Vyasa has a very long commentary on this sutra. Also, it is what is known as jatila, in the sense that it is somewhat complicated, somewhat technical in nature. But as we are trying to understand this text, the sutras along with the bhashya, we will go through it through the entire bhashya carefully while understanding what is being said. So as far as the sutra is concerned, the main thing to keep in mind is the discussion that was done so far can be extended to apply not only to the chitta but to bhūtendriyas as a whole, and the types of parinamas can be categorized as dharma parinama, lakshana parinama, and avastha parināmā. And from Vyasa's commentary that is going to follow, we are going to try to understand this. Secondly, why is all this so important? So the background also sort of needs to be known. So in all the darshanas, in philosophy as a whole, there is a need to explain this experience of the changing world. We see so many things are happening, both in the subjective side and the objective side. At the same time, there is also certain things that remain constant. And the Vedas talk about Purusha and Atma and Brahma and so on. And in terms of our experience also, even while changes are happening, there is an underlying entity that seems to be constant. As a child grows, we see that it is the same person, but still changing and growing from childhood to youth to middle age to old age, etc. So this mixture of underlying constancy, constant changes, etc. All the schools explain that in various ways. So for example, one school may say that everything is Brahma, everything is consciousness, and all these changes are illusory. So that is one explanation. Certain explanation says no, all the changes are real, and there are actual entities underlying those changes that are also real. Some other school may say there is no underlying entity, there is only these changes, and that is all there is to the world. So there is a lot of thought on this topic, a lot of detailed discussions, and all of that has to be, each school has to delineate how they understand it. So now from a Yoga Shastra perspective, this is an important question that needs to be clarified. And then in the next sutra we will see that not only is it about is it an academic discussion, but since yoga is about direct realization of various concepts and tattvas, how that also happens, we'll see in the next sutras that are coming next. Also beautifully, the way that Patanjali has weaved it is, in the previous discussion on Nirodha, Samadhi and Ekagratāpariṇāmā, he has given the context of how the chitta is undergoing changes in a yogi, whether in Nirbija Samadhi or Sabija Samadhi. So there has been an explanation of the yogic process and exactly what is happening in the chitta. And at the same time, that same explanation and the nature of that explanation of transformation applies, it is said, to bhūtendriyas as well. So in some sense, two things were achieved. One is to understand the process of samadhi and what happens in the chitta. And second is to understand the process of parinama and change, which can be then further expanded to the entire realm of bhūtendriyas. So that is sort of a synopsis of the discussion and the background and importance of it as we embark upon the long bhashya that is to follow. So Vyasa begins. He says, etena purvoktena citta parinamena dharmalakṣaṇāvasthāpariṇāmā bhūtendriyeṣu dharma parināmo lakṣana parināmo avasthāpariṇāmaścokto veditavyah. So he's clearly saying that by this discussion of chitta parinamas that happened in the previous few sutras in the form of dharma, lakshana and avastha parinamas, we should understand this to be applicable to veditavyah, means to understand, to be applicable to bhūtendriyeṣu, the bhūtendriyas, in terms of dharma parināmaḥ, lakṣana parināmaḥ, and avastha parināmaḥ. We should take it as it has been described for those as well. So that is the first point, a clear explanation of the sutra. Then he says, Tatra vyutthana nirodhayoho dharmayoho abhibhava pradurbhavo dharmini dharma parināmaḥ. So he says in that, so now he is referring back to the individual sutras that we just described and mapping that to dharmalakṣaṇā and avasthaparināma that is being introduced and explained in this sutra and bhashya. So there, over there, tatra means over there, vyutthana nirodhayoho dharmayoho. So there were two dharmas of the chitta, two attributes of the chitta, the vyutthana dharma and the nirodha dharma. Of those two, abhibhava pradurbhavo, the fading away of one getting suppressed. So in that case, it was in the nirodha parināma, the vyutthana was getting suppressed. So it was the abhibhava of the vyutthana, and the nirodha dharma was emerging and manifesting. So pradurbhava of the nirodha. So the two dharmas, vyutthana and nirodha, they're fading away and emerging respectively. In the dharmi, which was the chitta, is a dharma parināma. So here it is clearly being said that the first one, the nirodha parināma that was described in the context of chitta, was an example of a dharma parināma. Now, lakṣana parināmascha nirodhas trilakṣana tribhihi advavir yuktaha. So now about the lakṣana parināma. The lakṣana parināma is trilakṣanaha nirodha tribhihi advabhihi yuktaha. It is a nirodha with three lakshanas, with three marks, which is in three parts, the three advas that we have seen as the atita, the anagata, vartamana and atita, which we will see. So now we'll see a little bit about this lakṣana parināma. So it says, Sakhalu anagata lakshanam madhvanam prathamam hitva dharmatvam annatikrāntaha vartamanam lakshanam pratibannah yatra asya swarupena abhivyaktihi esho asya dvitiyo adva. So it says, Vyasa says, Sakhalu anagata lakshanam advanam prathamam hitva. So firstly, that particular dharma or the attribute, it is present in the path, the adva of the anagata lakshanam. So it had the mark of being anagata. It has not yet arrived, which is to say that it existed, but it existed in a certain condition, which is often referred to as latent state or potential state. It is something that has not yet arrived. So that is anagata, which we usually refer to something that is going to arrive in the future. So hence it is in a potential condition. So the dharma existed, but it existed with the mark of being anagata. Now giving up that path, that was the first, the prathamam, that prathamam adva. So giving up that, hitva means giving that up, dharmatvam anatikrāntaha. So it was, so for example here let us consider the dharma being the nirodha dharma. So the nirodha dharma was in a state of anagata. It was in a potential condition. So it is in the path of what in English we'll typically say future. So from that potential state, it comes to the vartamana lakshanam. It obtains the mark of being vartamana or present. Dharmatvam anatikrāntaha. So in the potential state also it was a dharma. In the vartamana present state also it is a dharma. Which is to say that as a dharma, as an attribute, it always exists. But until it becomes a thing of the present, it is a thing of the future. It is a thing that has not yet arrived. So it has that mark. It has that lakshanam. But in both cases, it is a dharma. Dharvatvam anatikrantaha vartamanam lakshanam pratipannaha yatra asya swarupena abhivyaktihi. So what is this vartamana lakshanam? What does it mean to go from the potential anagata state to the vartamana present condition? What it means is, it is clearly stated, it is swarupena abhivyaktihi. It manifests it in its own form. Swarupa means its own form. Abhivyaktihi means manifestation. So the moment it manifests in its own form, it is said to have reached or obtained the vartamana lakshanam, or the mark of being a thing of the present. Eshaha asya dvitiyodhva. This is its second path or second condition. The first one was anagata, second is vartamana. And what is vartamana? Swarupena abhivyaktihi is vartamana. Then he continues, nacha atita anagatabhyam lakshmanabhyam viyuktaha. So when it arrives in the vartamana condition, it is not as though it has completely gone away from, or it has lost completely the atita anagata lakshanas. Those also exist, but in a sukshma condition. So here we have to remember that Yoga Shastra is a satkaryavada. So everything exists. Nothing comes out of the blue. Nothing gets completely destroyed. So that point is emphasized over and over. And therefore it is said that nacha atita anagatabhyam lakshanabhyam viyuktaha. It is not as though the lakshana, the mark of atita and anagata has gone away. It is just that it has entered this path of being a thing of the present. The swarupena abhivyakti has happened. So this is the explanation of how in the Nirodha Parinama the Nirodha Dharma arose by going from the Anagata mark or Anagata path to the Vartamana path. Then it says tataḥ, similarly, vyutthanam trilakshanam tribir advabhir yuktam vartamanam lakshanam hitva dharmatvam anatikrantam atita lakshanam pratipannam esho asya tritiyodhva. Now continuing this, the Nirodha Parinama that we saw, we just saw that the Nirodha Dharma, it was initially in the Anagata mark, Anagata Lakshanam, in a potential state. Then its Swarupena Abhivyakti happened, so it got manifested in its own form and therefore entered the Vartamana Adva. It became the thing of a present. Now while this is happening, what happened to the Vyutthana Dharma, which is also an attribute? It says tatha vyutthanam trilakshanam. Just as the Nirodha Dharma is trilakshanam, which are the three lakshanas? Anagata, which is potential or future, Vartamana, present, Atita, past. Similarly, the Vyutthana, the worldly state, is also trilakshanam. So what happened to the Vyutthana in the context of Nirodha Parinama? So Vyutthanam trilakshanam, tribir advabhir yuktam, it also has the three paths. Vartamanam lakshanam hitva. It gave up the path of being the thing of the present. That path where it is a mark of the present. Vartamanam lakshanam hitva, giving that up. Dharmatvam anatikrantam. While it gives up the lakshanam, it doesn't cease to be a dharma. It is still a dharma. It is still an attribute. So dharmatvam anatikrantam. Atita lakshanam pratipannam. It attains the lakshanam, the mark of being atita. So it has now become a thing of a past. So it is no longer swarupena abhivyaktihi. It is no longer the completely manifested in its own form, but it enters the state that it had manifested, and therefore it is a atita lakshanam. So atita lakshanam pratipannam esho asya tritiyodhva. So for the Vyutthana, it enters its third path, the at some point it must have been part of Anagata, then it became Vartamana, and now it has entered its third path of being Atita. So the Vyuthana has gone away. Nacha Anagata Vartamanabhyam Lakshanabhyam Viyuktam. So when this happened, it is not as though it has completely lost the Lakshanas of Anagata and Vartamana. Those Lakshanas, those marks, because it was initially Tribihi Lakshanaihi Yuktam, it had the three Lakshanas. Now also it has the three Lakshanas, but however it has entered the path of being Atita. So Vyasa is being very careful in the way he is describing the mechanism, so that the explanation of Parinama and changes in Yoga Shastra is properly understood. Now, having described this in the context of Nirodha Parinama, he continues to say, when the yogi comes from Vyuthana, so from Nirodha back to Vyuthana, what happens? So he says, Evam Punaḥ. And then further, similarly, Vyuthanam Upasampadyamanam Anagata Lakshanam Hitva. So, when one goes from Nirodha and comes out back to Vyuthana, so that Vyuthana Dharma, it is again gives up the Anagata Lakshanam, because this new Vyuthana Dharma, which is going to arise, it existed but in an Anagata state, in a potential state, or potential mark, or the path of the potentialness. So giving that up, Dharmatvam Anatikrantam, still not ceasing to be a Dharma. It was whether the mark, the Lakshanam, is that of the potential, that is the future, whether it is part of present or Atita, it is always a Dharma. And therefore Vyasa over and over he says, Dharmatvam Anatikrantam. In all these conditions, it is still a Dharma, still an attribute. Vartamanam Lakshanam Pratipannam, obtaining the mark of being part of the present, which means Swarupena Abhivyaktihi. So the Vyuthana, now when the yogi is coming back from, or the Chitta is coming back from Nirodha to Vyuthana, it is the Vyuthana that gives up the Anagata mark. It attains the Vartamana mark, being part of the present. Where Yatra Asya Swarupabhivyaktav Satyam Vyaparaha. So it gets its Swarupa Abhivyakti, it manifests in its own form and it is then active. So Swarupa Abhivyaktav Satyam Vyaparaha. Esho Asya Dvitiyodhva. So for this Vyuthana Dharma, it is in the second path of being the Vartamana Lakshanam. Nacha Atita Anagatabhyam Lakshanabhyam Viyuktam iti. Again further it is said, Vyasa is repeating to make it very clear to understand. It says, in this case also, when this Vyuthana has become a part of a present, it has not lost the marks, the Lakshanas of the Atita and Anagata, because nothing completely goes away and the Satkaryavada is being affirmed here. Then he says, Evam Punaḥ Nirodha, Evam Punaḥ Vyuthanam iti. And in this way, Nirodha Vyuthana can be explained. So essentially, what is happening is, the Dharma, Vyuthana Dharma and Nirodha Dharma are getting different Lakshanas in the order sequence of Anagata, Vartamana and then Atita. And that is how the Dharma is undergoing changes through the Lakshanas. So that is what is being done here is, the Nirodha Parinama that was explained is being clearly explained in terms of Dharma and Lakshana, the terminology being introduced here. Then he says, tataḥ avasthāpariṇāmaḥ. So now having talked about the Dharma Parinama and the Lakshana Parinama, he talks about avasthāpariṇāmā. Before going there, just to clarify, the Dharmi, the Chitta, is undergoing Dharma Parinama because of the Vyuthana Dharma and the Nirodha Dharma coming about or going away. The Dharmas themselves, how are they undergoing the change? They are undergoing a Lakshana Parinama by changing from being a thing of with a potential, thing of the future, to becoming a thing of a present and then becoming a thing of a past. Now we look at avasthaparināma. Tatha avasthaparināmaḥ. Tatra nirodhakshaneshu nirodha samskara balavanto bhavanti durbala vyatthana samskara iti. Esha dharmanam avasthaparināmaḥ. So, in the state of the nirodha, what is happening? The nirodha samskaras are gaining in strength. Nirodha samskaraha balavanto bhavanti. They are gaining in strength, becoming more powerful. And the vyatthana samskaras are getting feeble and fade away. So this particular change is an avastha parināma because it is the condition that is changed. They are existing, but their avastha is changing in terms of getting more and more balavantam, powerful, and less balavantam, respectively, for the nirodha samskaras and the vyatthana samskaras. So this is the avastha parināma of those dharmas through the lakshanas. So that is what is being explained. Tatra, lastly, in this first section of the bhashya, tatra dharminaḥ dharmaihi parināmaḥ. So this is a very useful synopsis. Dharminaḥ dharmaihi parināmaḥ. Dharmanam tradvanam lakshanaihi parināmaḥ. Lakshananam api avasthabhihi parināmaḥ iti. So this captures or helps us understand. So let us understand this sentence, which summarizes the discussion. It says, the dharmi undergoes change through the dharmas. Okay, so the underlying entity undergoes change through the attribute, through the dharma. So dharminaḥ dharmaihi parināmaḥ. Now the attributes themselves, the dharmas themselves. So what is the nature of these dharmas? They are saying the dharma is tribhihi advabhihi yuktah. So that is why it says dharmanam tradvanam. The dharmas constituted of the three paths. They are having these three paths of anagata, vartamana and atita, of having the ability to be a thing of a potential, thing of the present and thing of the past. Of these kinds of dharmas, or dharmas that are of these kind, how does their change happen? Lakshanaihi parināmaḥ. So the dharmi is changing through the dharmas. The dharmas change through the lakshanas, where the lakshana is the anagata, vartamana, atita. And lakshananam api avasthabhihi parināmaḥ. The parināma of the lakshanas, that is when in a certain specific lakshana, the avastha is changing. So lakshananam avasthabhihi parināmā iti. Therefore, the explanation of parināma is through three layers, where the underlying thing is the dharmi. If we were to draw it, we will draw dharmi is as the underlying thing. On top of that, we'll draw the dharma. On top of that, or the dharma has these lakshanas, and then the lakshana undergoing change by avastha. So, what is described here is what are these three parinamas and how we can understand this, and this was explained through the explanation of nirodha parināma. In that context, it was explained how citta is the dharmi, the vyatthana and nirodha is the dharma, then they undergoing change via the three lakshanas, and then in the certain lakshana they undergoing changes through the avasthas in terms of the samskara becoming stronger or weaker. So with the example of the nirodha parināma that was described in Sutra 3.9, here the layers of dharma, lakshana and avastha parināma has been explained in this first paragraph of the bhashya on this particular sutra.
So, having mentioned the chitta parinamas in the sutras earlier to this, which were nirodha parināma, samadhi parināma and ekagratāpariṇāmā. So those having this explained with regards to chitta, he says bhūtendriya parinamas are also stand explained. That means there is similar process in transformation parinamas of bhuta indriya. Bhuta means sthula sukshma bhutas. Indriyas means again sthula sukshma indriyas. So their parinamas, bhutendriya parinamas, are given different nomenclatures, however they are of similar kind. So these are being called dharma parinama, lakshana parinama, avastha parinama. So with regards to chitta, the parinamas of a yogi's chitta, the parinamas are nirodha, samadhi, ekagrata. While chitta parinamas of we mortals who are not yogis, we have dharmalakṣaṇāvasthāpariṇāmā kind of parinamas. And they are also for sthula sukshma bhutas and sthula sukshma indriyas. Etena bhūtendriyeṣu dharmalakṣaṇāvasthāpariṇāmā vyākhyātāḥ. So etena purvoktena, he relates this sutra with the description, delineation that has come earlier. And therefore he says, etena purvoktena chitta parinamena dharmalakṣaṇāvasthārūpena bhūtendriyeṣu dharma parināmā lakṣana parināma avastha parināmascha uktah veditavyaha. So with regards to bhūtendriyas, the description is coming as dharma lakṣana avastha parināma. Now, the dharma parināma, lakṣana parināma, avastha parināma, they are being described, and it should be understood that this is with reference to bhūtendriyas. But then it is related to chitta parinamas mentioned earlier. Therefore, Vyasa explains it out, that just as tatra vithāne nirodhayoho abhibhava pradurvāvo dharmini dharma parināmā. So when the first chitta parinama was mentioned, namely the nirodha parinama, so he says just as Vyuthana and Nirodha are two aspects of chitta, phases of chitta, and one appears and the other one disappears. Vyuthana disappears, Nirodha appears. That is Abhibhava Pradurvāva, which was described in that sutra. That is, in the dharmi, there is dharma parinama. So chitta is dharmi. Chitta is substrate. And in that substratum, the parinama takes place. And when the substrate has a parinama, it is called dharma parināmā. So he tries to tell us which was the dharma parinama mentioned earlier. So that sutra which was Vittā Nirodha Samskarayoho Abhibhava Pradurvāvo Nirodha Kshana Chittanvayo Cittasya Nirodha Parināmā. So that is, Nirodha Parināma is corresponding to dharma parinama mentioned here, which is the parinama in the dharmi. In the substrate, there is a parinama that is called dharma parinama. So, Vitthana samskars tirobhava and Nirodha samskars abhibhava, pradurbhava. That is the dharma parinama. Now, in the dharma parinama itself, there is lakshana parinama. Now, in the substrate, there is dharma parinama. Now, dharma parinama is having a parinama, and that is the lakshana parinama. So, lakshana parinamascha, the rural three lakshana, tribhi adhva abhi. So he explains the lakshana parinama with reference to chitta, which is the lakshana parinama in the chitta mentioned as samadhi parinama in the chitta. So there he says there are three advas, three paths, what we call as atita, vartamana, anagata. The anagata becomes vartamana and vartamana becomes atita. This is how the parinamas are. If potential becomes actual and actual becomes latent. And the whole flow of parinama is from potential to actual to latent. And these are the three paths. The first path is potential, the second path is actual, and the third path is latent. So these are the lakshanas. Giving up the potential, giving up and becoming actual. Potentiality going and actuality appearing, and actuality disappearing and latency appearing is the lakshana parināma kind of thing. So, therefore he says, anagata lakshanam advanam pratham hitva. See, otherwise we think the past is first and then present and then future. This is our cerebral process and temporal process, empirical process. We bring the past first and then we say past, present, future. We don't say future, present, past in our worldly realm, in our common man's parlance. We think past comes first and then comes present and then comes future. This is how the thing in chronology appears to us. But the fact is that is not the case. Anagatam hitva, the vartamana will be coming up. And that is the happening in the dharma. So dharmas are constantly changing. Attributes and characteristics are changing. So one characteristic from future, anagata, becomes present, actual, and actual becomes latent. So that's how the parinamas are taking place. So he explains the lakshana parināma that way, which is in dharma. So dharmi has a dharma parināma and dharma has a lakshana parināma. And in lakshana parināma, we come across the three time frames, which are potential, actual, and latent. And that's why he mentions the three adva. And then he explains how the first adva becomes in the place of second, and second then goes to the place of third. That is from potentiality to actuality and actuality to reality. So this is how the parinamas are taking place. Transformations are taking place this way in bhūtendriyeṣu. So when the nirodha parināma has been established, then he explains the lakshana parināma in that dharma of the chitta, which is nirodha chitta, niruddha chitta. So there'll be, the time will be running, nothing stops such a time. But if the time is running, how does it run? It runs from anagata to vartamana to atita. So when these advas have similar kind of mental content, then that becomes the ekagratāpariṇāmā. The incoming cognition and outgoing cognition will remain. So that's how it is parināma in the dharma. The first one is parināma in the dharmi, and therefore it is called dharma parināma. Now this is a parināma in the dharma itself, so it becomes lakshana parināma. And with this lakshana parināma, he explains the prathama adva, dvitiya adva, and tritiya adva. Then comes the avastha parināma. Because when the samadhi is revoked, the samadhi when is revoked for a yogi, there is change in avastha, the state, the very state. Now it has become vyutthana state, the samadhi state is gone. Or when the vyutthana state is gone and samadhi state comes up, it is avastha parināma. So similarly, there are parinamas in the bhūtendriyeṣu, which are called dharmalakṣaṇāvasthāpariṇāmā. So he relates these parinamas to chitta parinamas and tells us how these parinamas are in the bhūtendriyas as well. And how the parinamas in bhūtendriyas occur is yet to be described. But he wants to first relate these three parinamas called dharmalakṣaṇāvasthā to nirodha, samadhi, ekagratāpariṇāmā in the chitta. Because there is relationship between these three parinamas of bhūtendriyas with the three parinamas mentioned in the very chitta, in earlier part of the sutras. So, with regards to bhūtendriyas, these are the three kinds of parinamas. So, it should be noted that even in Sankhya philosophy, somewhere they mention two kinds of parinamas, which is very interesting. So, one is samudra fenavat, the ocean and the foam, ocean and the bubbles. So, the bubble is essentially ocean. The foam is also essentially ocean. But we see the foam coming and foam going, bubbles coming and bubbles going. But they are all samudra parinama. While the other kind of parinama is dugdha dadivat, the milk becoming dadi parinama. So there we see that the characteristic changes are different. So in metaphysics, alinga, linga, avishesha, vishesha parinamas, these parinamas are something like samudra fenavat. And in phenomenal world, after the quintuplication, the parinamas are dugdha dadivat. So once the milk becomes curds, it is not possible to take back to dugdha parinama or dugdha avastha. Once the milk has become curds, you cannot take it back. Unlike the ocean and the foam. The foam will come and foam will become ocean again. Bubble will come, bubble will again become ocean. So in Sthula Sukshma Bhutas, parinamas are samudra phenavat. But when it has become matter, solid matter, liquid matter, gaseous matter, and the physical world, in the physical world, it is dugdha dadiva parinama. These are two kinds of parinamas. So here, Sthula Sukshma Bhutas and Sthula Sukshma Indriyas, their parinamas are being mentioned, which are dharma, lakshana, avastha. Parinama in dharmi is dharma parinama. Parinama in the dharma is lakshana parinama. And parinama in the lakshana itself, then you get avastha parinama. So this is beautifully described in later part of the sutra. Okay.
Okay. So we'll stop here for today and continue this bhashya in the next session. So let us recite the shlokas on Guruji and stop today's session. Vaijñānikam pravaktritva āsaneshu kalavidam yogābhyāse ca tattvajñam vandeham sundaram gurum yoga vriksho hi lokesmin yat preranena varditah Yogacharya Guru Tubhyam Sundaraya Namo Namaha. Thank you.